All right, predict to commit. I'll give the quick refresher, and then I will let you make your decision on what you're going to do today. We're just going to do one. Just going to do one today. We'll take it easy. We're probably going to have a bunch throughout the summer that we're going to be predicting, so I don't want to overload us today. But your team: running back Derek Cooper, linebacker Tyler Atkinson, defensive lineman Carter Lucky, tight end Mark Bowman, defensive back Jordan Smith, ding, offensive lineman Jared Smith, outside linebacker Kamari Brooks, quarterback Jared Curtis, ding, probably the best win that there's going to be for anybody on either predict to commit team all cycle long. Defensive lineman PJ Dean, wide receiver Craig Dandridge, defensive lineman James Johnson, tight end Caden Prothrow, offensive lineman Desmond Green, and then from flip a commit last week, Ole Miss linebacker commit Isaiah Williams. I'll say this. I've gotten some feedback over the last week on a few of your guys. I'll say this. One guy on your team you're not going to get correct, and then another guy on your team I got pretty good confirmation over the last week that you're going to end up getting that one correct as well. Not to say that there aren't other things coming from other names on your list as well, but two pretty solid pieces of information, both good and bad for you over the last week. On my team, offensive lineman Graham Houston, ding. Safety Zach Fort, ding. Those are my only two that I have gotten correct. Running back Jay Lamar, offensive lineman Malcolm Gaston, safety Tyreek Green, offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell is the only miss from either of our teams up to this point so far. Wide receiver Ryan Mosley, offensive lineman Ekene Boko, offensive lineman Brett Collegier, defensive lineman Ernest Rankins, defensive back Peyton Dyer, defensive back Justice Fitzpatrick, defensive lineman Whitley Cadeau, and Alabama offensive line commit Chris Booker. I will also say on my side of things, I could point to multiple on my side right now that I think are not going to hit. So just for those watching at home, just know, sure, do I cover recruiting? Is this an exercise in making Jordan and I look stupid potentially by the end of the summer? Absolutely. All right, Jordan, I'm going to let you go first. And the only curveball I'm throwing at you is it's not predict a commit day. It is flip a commit day. We are once again making predictions based on people that are currently committed to other schools. I'll let you go first.
I was so scared you were going to do that, and I should have just interrupted you and made a pick. And I'm like, oh, you want to do something else? So, no. Well, I will say before I pull this pick up that I'm just kind of doing, since we were talking about the Braves earlier, I'm just shooting for a decent batting average, like it's a baseball. If I hit like 400 on our predict a commit / flip a commit, I'll be satisfied. But you let me go first, and I think where I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to go with Shadarius Tootle. I think that, the understanding that this thing's not done, again, he's an Auburn commit right now, and we know how these things will play out. But I really like what we heard, and Ben, you did a great job reporting on his visit to Georgia and sort of the buzz and the vibes coming off of that visit. And, it's one of those situations, I think, especially in the last few years, linebacker has been a really interesting battle between Georgia and Auburn. I'm trying to remember, Ben, refresh my memory. Who was the guy Auburn got? There was a guy Georgia really liked. I think that was a couple of last. Joseph Phillips that Auburn wound up getting, that Georgia was after really hard. We've seen Auburn under Hugh Freeze really become more of a factor just in general in some of these recruitments. But I think when you consider how well Georgia has developed the linebacker position, when you consider that we still have a lot of questions, as we discussed earlier in this episode, with what Georgia was going to do at the position, I think that there's a connection and an appeal from both sides to eventually make this happen. So feel pretty good about this flip. I'm going to say that when it's all said and done, when that is, I'm not exactly sure. But that Shadarius Tootle is going to flip to the Georgia Bulldogs.
How would I middle of June, once he's gotten out of that Auburn visit? I think he's taking it. See on his profile right there. Does it have the date that he's taking? I think it's June 13th, but I could be wrong on that. June 13th. All right. Yeah. So I think after that weekend, we're going to know. I think at this point in time, it's Georgia or it's Auburn. I could see it going either way. I think that's a great pick by you, especially based on everything that we've been hearing, going into last weekend, but also coming out of last weekend. Was very much in consideration to be my choice today as well. So maybe another episode of poor judgment by me to let you go first, but great pick. I'm going to go with a guy that we have also already talked about during this episode a little bit, and someone that I'm taking a little bit of a leap of faith in terms of what I've seen from him as a player, how much I know now that Georgia values him and where he sits on the board, and the fact that he was at scavenger hunt weekend when he's going to take an official visit later in June, and that is UCF wide receiver commit Tyron Wortham. Not a guy we've written a lot about, but let me tell you, Georgia loves this dude. Georgia thinks that this dude is one of the more talented wide receivers in the country. Now, the catch, I think that there's a lot of programs that are not UCF that also think that this dude has emerged as one of the best wide receivers in the country, or at the very least in the southeast portion of the country. The fact that he took an unofficial visit to Georgia 3 weeks before he's coming back for an official visit. I think he was at Georgia at some point in the spring. I want to say it was either a scrimmage or the spring game. 3 visits in 2.5 months when you're committed somewhere else and Georgia's recruiting another player, highly rated player from your high school, and Chauncey Kennan. Jordan's going through the photos right there. You just saw he won MVP at his Under Armour regional at the wide receiver position. Not being talked about enough in terms of how great of a football player this guy is. And so because of that, I'm sort of just taking a chance that Georgia likes this guy. He's been on campus a couple of times, and I know now, which I really, when we would have been, I don't even know when we were recording a week ago, maybe a week ago I would have been made aware, but it was in the last week or two that I started to realize just how much Georgia likes this guy and where he sits on the board. And so because of that, I'm saying I think James Coley is as good as it gets in terms of identifying and evaluating his top targets and landing them. So this is a name that I'm adding to my list.
Yeah, I really like this one. Following the receiver group, it's been funny. This is why I don't usually answer a lot of recruiting questions. There was a couple weeks ago on our board, I'm like, hey, here's my Friday Q&A, and someone was asking about receivers. And I threw a few guys out, and I immediately had people say, well, what about this guy? And what about this guy? I was like, well, yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about that. Like trying to piece kind of the puzzles to get, the puzzle pieces together for a receiver in this 2026 cycle. It's just fascinating how exactly Georgia's going to go about it, because I also keep in mind they signed 5 guys in the 2025 class. Like how exactly they're going to kind of strike this balance with the receivers is really interesting. But yeah, I would be lying if I said I knew a lot about Tyron Wortham, but just what you went over there, just looking at, his build, 6 foot, 175, the appeal is pretty obvious. It'll just be one of those things if, getting that exposure to Georgia, taking that official visit later in the summer, if that winds up being enough.
Well, it goes back to a conversation we were having earlier in the show too. Like, I think as a fan, if you're following recruiting and you start to see, you start to fall in love with individual recruits, like I want this guy, I want that guy. And everyone has different reasons for why they start feeling that way about certain recruits. But I think the best situation you can be in as a Georgia fan is when you have, like what you just said, you list out 5, 6 names at wide receiver and people say, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? What about that guy? And I think that 3 positions that I think Georgia is really in that spot for right now is just defensive back across the board, safety and corner. I think that Georgia is positioned that way. At wide receiver, as long as James Coley is your wide receivers coach, you're going to be in that situation and you're going to have to be making difficult decisions by the end of a recruiting cycle. I also think the interior offensive line, which I've already mentioned, is like that. Like those are the 3 spots where I would say there are more names that Georgia likes than there are spots available. And I think when you're in that spot as a fan, I think that it's the right place to be. And I wouldn't get too worked up about who it turns out being. If a guy goes elsewhere, that's okay. There's other options. Maybe Georgia played a hand in them deciding to go elsewhere. But I would just point to those 3 position groups: wide receiver, anywhere at defensive back, and interior offensive line. There are more names than what Georgia is going to know what to do with. And so because of that, if someone asks, who are some guys that you like, at any of those 3 spots, you can name a few, and there will be names that will come up that people will say, oh, I really like this guy. Why not him? And again, I think that's a good spot to be. And as it relates to Tyron Wortham, any position that James Coley is recruiting is probably going to be in that situation.
And that's the thing too with how they put receiver together. Always fascinated because they did a great job of it in this last cycle of getting guys with different skill sets. So how exactly that comes together and how a guy like Wortham, if he winds up being a take and commits to Georgia, what that looks like as far as the different skill sets among the receivers.